Welcome to another Inspirational People episode. Today I'm here with JP Werlin. JP, say hello.
Hello.
JP is the CEO and co-founder of Pipeline, a cloud-based CRM system for building client relationships, growing sales pipelines, shortening sales cycles, and increasing business revenue. JP is also a husband, dad. You have two boys, I believe, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and you're an intentional builder of teams. You co-founded your company in 2006. Within a few years after launching, I stumbled across your system, and it was Pipeline Deals at the time. And I became a fan and vocal ambassador of your CRM system during my Noodlehead Marketing years. And I was always impressed with your ability to anticipate your customers' needs and proactively develop the system to address those needs. So today we'll explore that entrepreneurial journey and how you work smarter and live better. But before we do that, let's jump into your backstory. Tell me about you, how you got to when you were born to today, and how that intersected with your software company, and that you've sustained for the last 15 years.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a convoluted story, but happy to share. Thanks for having me, and always
yeah,
thank you for the support of Pipeline. You found us early, and it was just fun to know you then and know you now. So
yeah,
thank you for that.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
I think all in all, my life's been characterized by family, the outdoors, a sense of adventure, and a proclivity or at least a strong desire to do the right thing. Um, Nothing special on the background. My dad was in the outdoor industry. My mom was a teacher, a preschool teacher. She was my
mm,
preschool teacher. She instilled with me a love of play. She
okay,
wrote the book Play Power.
yeah, okay. So she's an author.
She's an author,
Yeah,
uh, but now is really into early childhood development, brain development, and speaks around the world on that. But just a very humble, largely outdoor childhood, um, and growing up in the wilds of California, Northern California, East Bay, and no one talked to me about college. Always had a proclivity to work. I started a paper out in fourth grade.
yeah.
For 8 years. Uh, worked it all the way through my senior year in high school.
Hmm.
You
And
know,
what drove you to do that? Was like, I want stuff and I need to pay for that, so let me get a job, or was there something else driving you?
I've reflected on that. Not really chasing money, although that helps life, right?
Yeah.
It's just a factor of life. Just always been doing things. I don't really have. I can't remember like I was saving up for this car or this bike or you know this thing. I think I remember taking experiences or trips in high school, whether
Yeah.
it's Santa Cruz to jump in the surf or camping in the mountains. But um, yeah, it's just I've always had a desire to be an entrepreneur. Sort of, I think it comes down to a trait of mine that I've found over the years is just living by design and not by default. And I felt
Mm,
money gave me the ability to be more design minded in how my life went.
yeah.
Um,
But
didn't have a,
but yeah, what, I mean, most people live by default, right? Or a lot of people do. And so what made you think to even consider an alternative like that?
I think it's just an independent spirit. I don't like, it might be a fallacy. I don't like thinking other people control you. I don't know
Mm,
where in my childhood, not to get too much on the sofa or the psychology couch a little bit, but I don't know if it was parental divorce
mhm.
or what, but and really, it was very amicable. It was like just kind of done out of
Yeah.
sight. It was very um, amicable experience. I've seen,
Hmm.
obviously horror stories with children and divorces, but that was really kind of seamless in my childhood. But I think just having a sense of ability to design where I want to go, and it really comes to an innate sense of where your locus of control is in
Yeah.
your personal ethos or how you're wired, right? Do you happen to the world or does the world happen to you?
Hmm.
And um, my locus of control is very, very much internal, maybe a little bit too much.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's been a guiding force in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, we tend to give ourselves a lot of headache by focusing on things we can't control when we can focus on those things we can. So how did that intersect with actually like with Pipeline? Had you done some entrepreneurial things before that, or was that your main
Yeah, I've
force
had
there?
a number of failed businesses before Pipeline, anywhere
Yeah.
from, oh, little chicken scratch ventures selling, Chum's eyeglass holders as an independent sales rep in
Okay.
college, to a private investigator in college. Tried working for a few places. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, so I went to work in a law firm.
Yeah.
Discovered before law school that I didn't want to be a lawyer.
Well, that's a good time to figure it out.
Um, Started a business in Salt Lake City, Jones and Stone, selling precious, semi-precious stones or beads.
Yeah.
That blew up. Yeah, so a whole bunch of different ones over the years. I had Bargain Betty with actually my
Okay.
current partner Nick, who we'll get into a little bit. Bargain Betty was an affiliate coupon site, right?
Okay.
That had one sale of note, but it opened some doors for us. So have always had an, and I studied business in school. I applied to one college. I didn't know about college. No one talked to me about college. And I just applied on a whim to a school. A mentor of mine talked about, hey, everything's a business. I thought I wanted to be a police officer actually in high
Okay.
school. And I used to hang out I worked at the police department as a cadet, shredding
Okay.
paper for
Yeah.
the records department, right?
Yeah.
Still used paper. Um, and I was on a ride along with an officer. I remember Tim Runyon, and I could tell you right in Concord, California, where we were on Monument Boulevard at To-Go's sandwich shop. And I said, he's like, "What are you going to do? What are you going to major?" And I said, "I don't know, probably criminal justice. I want to be a cop." And he's like, you know, I said, my favorite question when I was a kid, was asking people my age now, right, with the gray beards, uh, if you had to do it over again, what would you do differently? And
Hmm.
I don't know where I got this question from in high school, but I was running around kind of crazily, just asking any adult who'd give me the time of day that question. And Tim sat there. He was driving the squad car, and he sat there for a sec and thought about it for a minute. He says, everything's a business, even a police department. I
Yeah.
think I think I would get a business degree.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, done. Like that was the
That's what you needed.
decision process. And thanks to, I don't even know. I should probably write Tim a note. I don't know where he is or
Thank
whether
you.
he's retired, but that question and answer randomly in a squad car on Monument Boulevard in Concord, California, set me on my way and just opened me up to a whole new universe. And then started down the business path.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting because, I shut down my marketing company in 2014, but a year before that, and then it was about a 7-year journey, and then about halfway through that journey, I asked myself a similar question, like if I were to do things over again. And the first time I asked if I were to start a marketing company from scratch, how would I do it differently now that I'm 3 years in? And so we restructured the business. And then when we did that, then we kind of created the type of business we wanted. Then I asked myself a question again, which is, if I were to start over vocationally, would I even choose to do a marketing agency? And the answer was no. So that was part of why I ended up shutting it down. But yeah, that's funny that you had that question, because I think there's so much insight into that. And I think, I mean, what would you say to someone who is perhaps in that role? They're doing something that's not the thing that they would or would choose if they were to choose over again. What would you tell them?
um, to not give up on chasing what it is you want to chase, right? I think a lot of times the perceived level of effort to make a change might seem overwhelming or greater than it actually is in making switches
Yeah.
intelligently switches. And you know, I think there's, especially in today's environment with how distributed everything
Mhm.
is, non-geographically centric businesses are.
Yeah.
Uh, there are honest and good ways to make career switches, as you know, think of it as two ramps, right?
Yeah.
And on on the x-axis is obviously time, and on the y-axis would be, you know, focus or involvement. And think of, you know, two lines, one, you know, a negative slope and one a positive slope.
Yeah.
And the negative slope, starting at 100% of your times, your current endeavor, whether you're working for somebody else or your own
Yeah.
gig. And, you know, how do you ramp that down intelligently over time and ramp up from zero the thing you want to be doing? And, you
Yeah.
know, pipeline, we call that working two jobs. And
Mm.
that's what we did to start the company, Nick and I both, for a while. It takes discipline, it takes hard work, and it takes, you know, a support system of some sort, right? I had a fortunate to have a wonderful supportive wife. And I think if anyone finds themselves in that conundrum, can you design those two slopes? And of course, the great off point is that intersection, right,
Yeah.
where they cross. And the
That
current,
that's the scene in Indiana Jones where he's switching the statue for the sandbag, right?
we're hoping the poison darts and the
The ball does it, the boulder.
over, and it might. But I think the question to ask yourself is, what's the worst case? What's the worst thing that
Yeah.
can happen here? And, you know, what if I'm a failure? What if I go bankrupt? Like, all those things can play into your mind there. But I think we, you know, human tendency is to sort of overestimate your fears and underestimate your
Mhm.
potential.
Well, and part of that is, you know, even if you did fail or even if you did have to go bankrupt, in the larger scheme of things, those aren't all that tragic. I mean, compared to a lot of other tragedies that we often face in life, you know, death of loved ones, for example. So it's
Yeah,
actually a pretty safe failure, right? At least in America.
100%. And um, I think putting the failure in perspective, you know, I've very much tried to live by the rocking chair perspective. And, you
Okay.
know, when faced with those decisions, and, you know, I think, you know, when facing decisions, you know, there's definitely two questions you need to ask yourself. And I think um, Bezos put these the best is, um, you know, is the decision reversible,
Yeah.
right? Or you know, irreversible on the other side of the same
Yeah.
token. And then number two, or how high are the stakes?
Hmm.
And so it's a very simple matrix. And if it's decisions reversible and the stakes are low, no brainer, right?
Just do it. Yeah.
If it's, you know, if it's any combination of the two, maybe give it some thought. And then if it's irreversible and high stakes, that's the time you take all the time you need to
Hmm.
make sure.
Procrastinate that decision as long as you can.
That's not as long as and that's where procrastination can be your friend, right?
Yeah.
Let some things happen, you let some other things fall into place. Um, and yeah, maybe even procrastinate a little bit on the decision
Yeah. Yeah.
and go from there. But so when faced with those decisions, um, you know, you can find a way, I believe, and again, this goes back to locus. Where is your locus of control? You know, I believe there's always a way to design yourself out of that paper bag, right? There's
Hmm.
very rarely the people we run into in our professional lives, thankfully, are like in super dire consequences, right? We're not, you know, fleeing a ruthless dictator across the Mediterranean and using
Hmm.
water bottles as flotation devices, right? Like
Yeah.
that's going down in the world. Excuse my language, but that stuff's going down in the world today. And
Yeah.
that's
Hmm.
real. I think the stuff we deal with maybe is a little more cerebral. It doesn't make it less impactful to our lives for us, but it just, and I think that's one of the benefits of the pandemic for those who got through it relatively intact, is it helps put things in perspective, and it helps you also
Hmm.
feel empathy for others, and also understanding that your situation may not be that bad.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I guess how does how does that intersect with, so you mentioned Nick and he was your co-founder, and it sounds like a lot of what you were doing was very different than a CRM sales system. So how does your business degree, Nick, and starting this company, how does that all come together?
I don't know if it does, like it did, right? It all comes together. I would say through e-commerce, right? I think
Hmm.
that's where I grew up professionally, if you will.
Mm,
So, I went to Sac State, the only college I applied to, took a victory lap there, 5 years to get out of there. I ended up serving as the student body president my 5th year. And so just kind of took a half load the last 2 years. And I got a lot of exposure there. And I think that's great for college students these days, because that was at the time, I don't know what the Associated Students at Sac State is now, but at the time was a $4 million nonprofit. And we ran
hmm.
like an aquatic center and a childcare
Yeah.
center and outdoor adventure store. And so, I mean, where else do you, I was VP of finance and then the president, and you had the executive director who was kind of the adult in the room.
Yeah.
And we had an amazing one, Carol. She was an early mentor of mine. And, but where else do you get the keys to a $4 million corporation when you're 21? Like it was,
Yeah.
and I mean, you had staff, you had hiring, you had firing, you had budgets, um, you had student clubs and organizations applying for funds. You had a board of directors, Robert's Rule of Order, and it was just a great, safe place to learn business. I
Mm,
think that set me up. Sac State set me up to get out into the real world. And I've been talking a lot to high school students actually lately, Jason, and they
yeah.
ask a similar question: is like, how did you get where you get, or where you are today? And it, the key element was curiosity and really valuing new things. It helps. I'm kind of not kind of, I am a nerd, like a geek, whatever the
Like
proper term,
technology wise or elsewhere?
technology wise. And I just am enamored with technology. Um,
So where did
maybe
you meet Nick then? Was he in the tech space?
he was in the tech space. And so
Okay.
we both found our way into e-commerce. And the reason why I bring up curiosity is because I knew in 94 when I saw my first Netscape, or maybe 93 Netscape Navigator browser, that the world had just changed. I
Mm,
don't know. I couldn't predict all that's happened, right? I don't think anyone can since
yeah.
1993 or whenever you saw your first browser, but that just triggered a sense of curiosity. And I knew the world has changed. And I've seen this a few times, right? Pattern recognition over the years, when my wife held her first iPhone or my friend got their first Tesla. Like there's certain times in life where you're like, wow, that this is now changed.
Yeah. Something has shifted. Yeah.
And so I saw that early on with the internet and e-commerce. And I just married two areas of intense curiosity out of school. And this
Mm,
was after a year. I took a year, kind of a gap year after college with Christine, my wife, Christine, and we traveled for a year. And we got back. I came in on a boat from through the Panama Canal from Key West, Florida. I was working as a deckhand and, sanding and paint and, tending to the engines. And we arrived in Seattle and in 1999, and I was just enamored by e-commerce and the outdoors. So I went and found
mm,
an e-commerce shop here in Seattle. At the time, 49% owned by Amazon, ironic. Was gear.com. Gear.com, blew up in the bubble. I had to let go of my friends, a lot of tears, a lot,
mm.
like just letting 10, like got up maybe to 80 people, and I was one of the last five.
Wow.
Sold with the company to overstock.com.
Okay.
And that was really continuing my e-commerce. And then got recruited out of Overstock to a company back east in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, recently gone public, called GSI Commerce,
Okay.
uh, started by Michael Rubin. And then he obviously built that up and sold to eBay. But I lasted there less than a year, and then went out on my own. And
Mm,
that's met. Nick interviewed me at GSI Commerce when I moved from
Okay.
Overstock in Utah to GSI in Pennsylvania. And again, confluence of two curiosities, internet and outdoors / sporting goods.
Yeah. So at the time in 2006, if I remember right, there I remember there was Salesforce. I had switched to high rise to your system. What was the space like in the CRM world? Was that an opportunity area that you thought you could tap into? Was it pretty crowded or?
No, it was a space everyone said was done in 2005. And they said, Salesforce owns it. What are you thinking?
Yeah.
Why would you start a CRM now? We were running an agency, kind of like Noodlehead, Nick and I were, called
Yeah.
Downtown E-commerce. And service businesses are hard. Like people who can scale, build and scale services businesses like marketing agencies, I have the highest esteem for them.
It's intense.
It is intense, and we loved it. We had major clients in the internet retailer top 500 sort of level, super boutique-y, super white glove, like
Mm-hmm.
high touch. Wasn't very scalable, but worked with some amazing people. Like I think at
Mm-hmm.
our most, we were 6-person agency, and
Yeah.
gone on to see where they are now, and they're very senior level people. Some of them still in e-commerce actually.
Yeah.
Uh, and you got to a point um, with the agency where you wanted to build a product. I think that's a natural. I've seen that with my friends
Yeah.
around the business world, is they start in a service world and they tend towards a product, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially with SaaS and the barriers to entry coming down. So we looked at two. I'll have to show you the design sometime. Jim did them, and they're so funny. But we ended up looking at bug tracking software and CRM.
Mm.
And another mentor of mine, Heidi, who built and sold an affiliate marketing company in New York, I was kind of kicking around this idea with her one day in Manhattan. She was kind enough to give me some time. She was growing her business. And I asked her about CRM. And she said, JP, my customer list is my gold. And if you're building the vault for my gold, I would say that's a good business.
Mm.
And highest regard for Heidi and what she's done over the years. And I was like, okay, done. I called
You got another signal.
and Heidi was the signal through the noise, and it was a no-brainer to CRM. But again, people thought we were
Yeah.
crazy.
But had you or Nick done sales? Had either of you been in sales before?
Well, I believe everyone's always in sales. I've been in marketing, supply the salesperson. I was in sales early days, going door to door, selling newspaper.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
but I guess what I meant is, like, had you been in a role where you used a CRM and were just frustrated, or
well,
was it?
yes.
Yeah.
Nick had done a Salesforce, I believe it was a Salesforce implementation when he was at a consulting shop.
Yeah.
That was a nightmare, right?
Mm.
50% of CRM installations fail. Total cost of ownership is through the roof. But more specifically to our small little marketing agency, is we were running a sales pipeline on a spreadsheet,
Okay.
which, I had the good fortune to meet with Microsoft a while back, and I asked them, I said, who do you think has the biggest CRM in the world? I'm like, well, Salesforce, of course. Of course, they're proud of Dynamics and didn't want to say Salesforce. They kind of whispered it under their breath. I said, actually, you're wrong. The biggest CRM in the world is Microsoft Excel.
Mm.
I still today, 15 years into the life of Pipeline, Salesforce has been around 20 plus years, right?
Mm-hmm.
The biggest CRM in the world is still Microsoft Excel, or now Google Sheet, right?
Yeah.
And I think that was a key realization. Is I ended up kind of nerding out, and I still do. Like I'll still mentor other businesses or whatever, but business software solutions that are currently being solved by spreadsheets are super compelling to me.
Yeah.
And that's just another sort of signal that I use when looking at businesses or thinking through business ideas. If it's you could find a better way to solve it than a spreadsheet, and they're getting powerful. I think Smartsheet here
Yeah.
in Seattle, who recently went public, is built on this premise, right?
Yeah.
Google Sheets lives on this premise, but spreadsheets are super powerful and sticky. And I'm still, even after 15 years, a little bit enamored with the potential here. I don't think they're
Hmm.
fully used, but that's what we saw with Pipeline when we started it. And it was solving a problem in our marketing agency, Downtown E-commerce. The spreadsheet broke, right?
Okay.
More than two people working the sales process. Deals were falling through the cracks. We looked around for an SMB, small, medium sized business solution, or even sole proprietor solution. And there was nothing, man.
Yeah.
Nothing. So our timing was good, but I think our willingness to take VC and sort of supersize the idea was not
Mm.
in us for this venture.
Yeah.
Uh,
You wanted to bootstrap it from the beginning.
yeah, we chose a different path.
Yeah.
Now, fast forward, knowing what I know now, should we have probably taken the 200 million and yada yada yada? Different story. Pipedrive came after us, Copper, Insightly. All the people we compete with. Um, they're all sort of followed in after us, and I think those three alone collectively raised over 200 million of VC.
Mm. Yeah.
We didn't do that.
Yeah. And did that allow you to learn things by growing organically that you may have missed with? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about Pipeline is, um, I think it's a story about a newer business model with sort of a value creation thesis at its core.
Okay.
Um, this isn't a scale or built to flip thing. This is really a value centric ethos in this business that Nick and I started with and still have to this day. But I think, in other words, we're operating what some would call an old fashioned company in a modern tech business delivery model. And I think that's still true to our ethos. Like, we look more longer term. We had a long conversation today at our leadership team meeting around how we can look even longer term on our customer relationships, and how can we um, use that for the benefit of our customers and our business, right? I like
Hmm.
symbiotic relationships, where things aren't divergent. I don't,
Yeah.
we're just running business a different way, and that comes at a price, right? You have to. I historically have had to take I feel a little bit of a discount because we don't have the $80 million of capital in,
Hmm.
which that's totally cool. Like, this is the path we
Yeah.
chose. I wouldn't
But it
trade.
also seems like there's always a trade-off for that $80 million they're getting. There's something or someone that's lost later on, that when you get to that later on, you're going to have the advantage. Is that something you would
I would
anticipate?
say we're still around.
Yeah.
And if you research the pipeline deals story, you'll see about 6 years ago we did take on a group of angels, sort of a
Hmm.
Series A, and we're headed down this path. Um, and we just unwound all that. We're back to 100% employee owned.
Mm.
We looked at some some leaders who bought back from their investors, and we did the same. And
Yeah. Well,
uh,
tell me more about the employee owned, because um, I think as a consumer, as a customer, I've used companies that they get acquired and then they change. And I feel
100%.
like I lose in that situation because I now have to go and find something else that did what I originally went to this company for, and now they're no longer that. Is that a part of it, or is that separate?
No, I think maybe subconsciously, or maybe not so subconsciously. I think it just rubs me the wrong way as a user too. And um, I think that's why we've been in business, and Nick and I are still involved as day-to-day operators of the business, and we haven't sold. And not to say we never will, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I have the same sentiment. Like, growing up professionally, growing up last really 20 years in the tech field, all web enabled businesses that I can't tell you how many apps I've fallen in love with. They get sold to Google was the big shutter
Yeah.
downer up until a buyer, acquirer, and shutter downer. That's an official term. Uh, up until about 2010, 2012, right? Like it would just be like, oh crap, Google bought another app and now they're sunsetting it and I got to get all my
Hmm.
data out, or I lose the utility of that service. And good on the guy. Like I don't place any animosity or ill
Yeah.
will towards the business people who build and flip and find a value play, or find a seam and exploit the heck out of it and sell it and walk away. I think it's a poor user experience? 100%. Like,
Yeah.
um, you could argue, I think I'm just close to my customers. I care about
Mm,
them, right? This goes back to being, the keeper of their gold. And it's just, we have a small population of 2,500 or 3,000 businesses, depending if you count trials or not, et cetera, but using pipeline. And I just feel a strong sense of an obligation to them.
hmm.
And people approach us to buy us. And it's just not something we've prioritized really in the business.
Yeah. So how do you, speaking of the customer, how do you anticipate, like like I said, when I worked with you, I felt like I'd be using your system and then I'd be like, man, it'd be cool if Pipeline did this. And then like the next update, it had it. And I never told you that. So
That's
how are
great.
you staying up to date with your customers' needs in such an effective way?
Yeah, I think I've thought a lot about that. Is how does a business stay close to their customer, right? And I think Tony Hsieh at Zappos was sort of the first business thinker. Um, really sorry about his passing last year, but was the first business thinker I saw to truly invert the pyramid with the customer. Uh,
Hmm.
and it was revolutionary. And frankly, it still is revolutionary. And for those of you who don't know, Tony took the view that customer care, customer service was a marketing expense
Hmm.
and not a cost center. And I think
Hmm.
that was a stroke of genius.
Yeah.
I remember at Overstock, like, man, what a chop shop that on the customer side that was, because it was like contacts per order, what minutes they were tracking, like typical, and not like many call centers still do this today.
Yeah.
And people outsource their customer service. And
Yeah.
I'm like, no, like, is this really the best? Like, voice aided response systems, you will never find them at Pipeline. We pick up with a human. We're never going to outsource our customer service, right? Like, thinking of taking care of your customer as a marketing expense, having the ability to build a relationship with your customer. Why
Yeah.
would you outsource that? Why would you minimize that? Why would you say, I want to limit our contacts per order? I
Hmm.
want to minimize the time each of my reps spend on the phone with a customer. Like, are you
Yeah.
kidding? Like, why are you in business? And so this is where I get sort of a little bit overly passionate maybe about the customer relationship. But again, that initial glimmer or lesson was from Tony
Hmm.
and Zappos's view of e-commerce. And growing
Yeah.
up in e-commerce and seeing him sell to Amazon, um, really opened my eyes as to thinking of customer service as a marketing expense. And also Mike McDermott was an early conversation we had. Nick and I met. He was in New York. He was building FreshBooks,
Okay.
uh,
Yeah.
for up in Canada, doing amazing work up there. And he was an early SaaS CEO, and he was kind enough to take a breakfast meeting with us in up in New York. Um, I believe near Union Square, actually, there on the west side of Union Square. But I can still remember the corner. And we showed them the website, and we're all excited. And I think a tendency many small businesses have is to act bigger than they are because they're
Yeah.
afraid of being found out or something, and like Amazon and Google. And we fell into that trap too. And we showed Mike our homepage. The first thing he goes, "Where's your phone number?" I'm like, "What do you mean? It's on our contact us page." "Don't you want to talk to your customers?" Nick and I are like, well, yeah, we want to talk to our customers. Well, put your phone number on your homepage, dummies. And so
Top
you'll
and center.
you'll see today, 866 703. I'm forgetting it today, but that number is still front and center on our homepage, right?
Yeah.
And that's just
Which
how.
is the opposite of how a lot of these e-commerce companies are. Is you have to like hunt to get a phone number if you can even get one.
Yeah, and look, you can't fault Amazon. Like they've done it at scale, but the phone number is still super buried.
Yeah.
I think, okay, we're not all Amazons.
Yeah.
As much as we
They
might,
have something to offer that's different.
and like they put the customer center. They've figured that out how to do it at scale fairly well, obviously. But I think there's definite seams of opportunity for, especially in the SMB world, which is a little bit different than B2C, right? B2B versus B2C. In the B2B world, I think there's still opportunity to improve service levels. Like
Yeah.
people's like, oh, what's your secret sauce at Pipeline? I'm like, especially outsiders or people trying to value the business, and they want some IP or patent, or I'm like, it's not. I'll tell you what it is, but I'm kind of embarrassed, and it's
So basic, right?
oh, to me, it's business 101, man. Like, value your customer, talk to them, make yourself available.
Yeah.
And so I think service can still be a differentiator in today's market.
Yeah. So you mentioned, you're an intentional builder of teams. You mentioned some people that have mentored you, and you mentioned speaking to the students. What is the importance of mentoring? What does it mean to you? How do you live it out? How does it help you?
Sure. It's super important. I've shared a few mentor stories. Officer Runyon, Carol, Heidi, a lot of influences over the years. Local guy Joe, um, and I think my time. I also spend time working with other entrepreneurs through the Entrepreneurs Organization, um, and that's sort of a peer-to-peer group of CEOs.
Yeah.
Uh, that's super fundamental. And I think mentorship can occur also peer-to-peer. It doesn't have to be like
Yeah.
senior junior sort of roles.
Yeah.
Well,
Got a barker.
that's Hobbs. But mentorship for me is about giving back, about servant leadership, about finding a way to really just experience share, right? Not advice giving or shoulding on people. You should do this, like taking
Yeah.
no action in the advice giving.
Mm.
But conceptually, mentorship just lines up with my personal mantra of leaving this place better than I found it.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I put that into action. How do I leave this place better than I found it? Is I put it into action in many, many ways. And, it's also reciprocal, right? I think with mentorship, it's important to me. I find it great if people ask, and make it clear that they're looking for advice and they're making themselves vulnerable and putting themselves out there. Because then I know, okay, that person's receptive and
Yeah.
willing. So also mentorship's a little bit of a dance to find people who really are truly committed to learning and aren't just networking. I
Yeah.
would
What's
delineate.
real? Yeah.
But it's about leaving this place better when we found it. I believe, ancient civilizations really valued the elder in their society and in their community. And I do too, right? And
Yeah.
I still have a lot to learn. I think I definitely subscribe to sort of that beginner's mind.
Hmm.
And I think if I can help other people on their beginner's mind journey just earlier on,
Yeah.
I owe it to the universe to do that.
Yeah. So when you think about narratives and stories and how they shape us and direct us, and you've shared some of them, like what are some that have really shaped you as a person?
Yeah. funny. If I was in my office, you'd see over my shoulder, my wife painted for me the most influential story that I've reflected along a lot on this past year is the story of Ernest Shackleton,
Okay.
uh, and
I've not heard of it.
through the endurance. So,
Okay.
early 1900s, right around World War One, Ernest Shackleton from England leads a expedition to Antarctica,
Mm.
and he'd been there a couple of times. Interesting guy. Um, and this is all encapsulated much better than I can ever tell. And I won't give away the story, but Captain Shackleton, well now Sir Shackleton, finds his ship trapped in ice and a crew of men with diminishing resources, and everything that can go wrong goes wrong. And it's a story of endurance and perseverance, and
Yeah.
that that really resonates with me. But there's also I take a lot. I like the realness of these stories. I like um, obviously the leadership elements to them. How do you lead? I forget the size of the crew. Call it 20 men on the endurance. How do you lead 20 men with all these different personalities? What does he do to see them through their darkest days?
Mm.
How does he behave? What does he prioritize? What is his demeanor? How does he
Yeah.
control himself? But other stories, um, Rachel Carson is an amazing story. Slavomir, I'm going to say his name wrong. I've only read it, so I don't know how to pronounce
Yeah.
Morawicz. He, escaped a prison camp and walked across the entire continent of Asia.
Wow.
Uh, Obviously, Lincoln's a great story, um, but also fictional stories. Again, this will give away a little bit about me, but Locus of Control. But like East of Eden, I find is a great story as well. That is
Hmm.
very still speaks to me and is insightful. Unbroken, Into Thin Air, like all those stories, I find
Mm.
interesting.
Against all odds, type of. Have you
Yeah,
seen? Yeah. Have you seen Gravity or The Revenant?
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All,
Everything that could go wrong goes wrong, but
yeah, or
they overcome.
reflect Shawshank Redemption, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Story of William Wallace. I visited his museum up in Scotland. Like that's a real dude. Like it's not crazy Mel Gibson with the blue face paint, but
Yeah.
like this guy
There's
was
a
real.
real story behind there.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
with all their failings too, right? Like they were human. They're not to be idolized, I don't think. I think they're to be learned from in their full humanity,
Hmm.
and also in the context of their time. Um, yeah, I love those stories. So I could I'm just kind of nerded out onto that genre. So
Yeah. So how does that intersect with, your work and your personal, and you mentioned, the outdoors. I mean, how do you harmonize or unify or balance those different facets of yourself?
lately, I don't know that I do. I guess I would start. I definitely don't have the magic formula. Um, for me lately, it's been slowing down.
Hmm.
More time thinking and less time doing. I think if you've grown up, and again, I use that term kind of colloquially, but grown up professionally or
Yeah.
evolved professionally
Maturing. Yeah.
in, but in a from I guess personal context, but in a professional context, like how do you measure what a productive day is, right? Like very early on in your career, you're a specialist, right? And we I don't know if we've all seen that chart, but you start out very specialized 100% of your time. And as you move and progress through your career, and it doesn't have to be sequentially or linearly, you could,
Yeah.
there's functions in there and there's massive leaps and there's also setbacks.
Hmm.
But as you navigate that path, we generally tend to become less specialized and more generalized. And, you know, responding to email isn't necessarily, your biggest value add. And so
Yeah.
I've been really fascinated on um, slowing down, spending time thinking about those activities I do or the work that I do that is compounding in its.
Mm.
And so, I mean, compounding, I don't, coming from the finance degree, at least, I never worked in finance specifically. Like, I didn't get my Series 6 or 7 or any of that stuff. But we hear compounding, but I think a lot of great thinkers lately have been applying and recognizing that compounding applies to many aspects of life, uh,
Mhm.
from knowledge to relationships, and also, of course, to investing in money, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and I also believe, processes or things we do in business have a compounding effect over time. And I think one of my biggest mistakes over the last 15 years was being too much in a rush to do things instead of slowing down and being more intentional and thoughtful on installing processes that will compound and
Yeah.
accrue to me or accrue to the business beneficially over time. So I've been thinking a
Yeah.
lot for sure. I
Yeah,
think,
because it's like if you're gonna choose to do two things, the compounding is just gonna be. It may have a less of a shorter term impact, but in the long term, you're going to be winning multiple factors.
yeah, and it just makes you, it's kind of like a ski boat getting up on top of the water,
Mhm.
right? Like if you're always working, responding to email and, just doing all the to-dos and not setting time apart to think and
Yeah.
plan. And again, the plan's not the prime
Yeah.
result. Planning, that's the true meat of that. You can't really get the boat up on top of the water and get speed and start. It
Yeah.
just is a drag. It's that heavy
Mm.
back end, just an anchor. And so,
Fighting it instead of leveraging it for a benefit. Yeah.
100%, and I
Yeah.
just wish I realized that earlier, right? And it's a trap. Like
Mm.
Admiral Akbar in Star Wars. It's a death.
It's a trap. Now, how did the pandemic, the crisis of that, did that play a role in that revelation, or is that related?
It's related. I think the pandemic gave me an opportunity to help others, both at Pipeline, and I happened to accept being the chapter president of EO Seattle, which is just 177 entrepreneurs, part of a global organization of 15,000 entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And I've been there since 2012. Um, Super impactful in my life, and
Hmm.
leaders leading leaders. It's a whole nother leadership dynamic. Is how do you lead 10 other or 177 other CEOs just like yourself? Like, I call them cats, but I heard my friend Andrea, she called it herding tigers. And so I said yes to that role as a volunteer. It's a nonprofit. I don't know, 2 years ago. And little
Mm.
did I know I was signing up for pandemic year. And
Oh,
so
wow.
what we did is completely reinvented the chapter this year. And you don't know. I mean, membership's about $6,000 a year. It's not cheap. I think it's the best, some of the best money I spend every year, without a doubt, from a personal and business development standpoint. But that those stories that I shared, whether it's Rachel Carson or Ernest Shackleton, um, those stories, like those EO gave me purpose this year in navigating all the trials and tribulations that affected the Seattle entrepreneurship community. And tangentially, I mean, those 177 entrepreneurs employ tens of thousands of people in the Seattle region. Some of their businesses went to zero overnight.
Wow.
Um, my friends in traveling and travel industry and catering. Others had to completely reinvent themselves from an in-person business to a virtual business. And so this slowing down, intentionality, moving relationships out of transactions and into
Hmm.
true relationships, I was afforded to do last year with how it totally changed my life. And I
Yeah.
feel, you know, just it's I wouldn't wish the pandemic on anybody, right? It's a 100-year storm you never want to live through. Um, but we lived through it, and it affected people in very, very different ways. But it gave me a new sense of prioritization. It gave me a chance to go back to some redesigning because I had slipped
Mm.
into some default behaviors,
Okay.
both with the business and at home, right, on the personal front. And it gave me a chance to re-architect. So I'm coming out of this, and I don't think it's over. I think we're going to be dealing with this for a long time in some
Yeah.
degree.
Legacy effects.
Yeah, I think some of the people much smarter than I have, at University of Washington, say this could last. We'll be dealing with this in some form for 30 years, right? Kind of like the
Yeah.
flu. And so how do we navigate in this new world, and what do I add back, or what do I do better? And so, one of those is, getting out of transactional relationships, making sure I'm not being transactional,
Mm-hmm.
not just being busy, but being productive, taking time to think. Um, we just, there's so much stimulus in today's world. Like
Low noise.
yeah, it's noise and it's distraction. And are you being creative, or are you consuming? You know,
Mm-hmm.
such a consumer consumption focused world, and we're incentivized to consume, but when do you create? Those are all things I think
Yeah.
about. And curiosity, like getting back in touch with what am I curious about? Because
Yeah.
curiosity hasn't steered me wrong over the years. It's who I
Yeah.
am, um, thankfully, along with some very good people over the years. But get back in touch with curiosity.
Yeah. So when it comes to like systems,
Mhm.
you've described some of them. You've built a system that you sell your business as a system. When you think about systems of design or intentionality or structure or teams or software or products, what are systems to you, and how do you think about them? And
Right. Interesting question. I would think a couple things. Very, very broadly, and there's a lot of ways you could go with this question, but very, you know, sort of initially for me, a system has to meet at least the criteria of repeatable and scalable, right? Um, and whether it's a personal productivity system, and my business partner, he's a biohacker, like he's always tuning his sleep schedule and diet, and he's the only one I know who looks younger every year. We call him the Benjamin Button of pipeline. But Nick Bertolino, so but having a system that repeatable, scalable, measurable,
yeah,
um, in one that is um, in agile development, you have the postmortems, where you go back and say what went right, what went wrong.
hmm
Uh, and I think though, if you don't have a system that allows for that, those key elements, you're just on a hamster wheel.
mm,
I think also what I've learned in going back to the concept of compounding, a good system will help you um, compound your productivity over time,
yeah,
right? And maybe I don't want to be too obsessed with being productive, because I don't think all growth is necessarily good, and I don't want to get too far down
yeah,
you know, road on capitalism versus conscious capitalism, which I think is a major issue, but definitely out of the realm for this discussion. But I, it's not too much about compounding just to be productive. It's compounding so you can be a better influence, gives you the time to be a better influence or a better contributor to the world. I think
hmm
that to me is the net, and whether you're like you're doing these days, sharing ideas, and that's contributing to the betterment of the world,
yeah,
or building software that helps someone be more effective in their business,
yeah,
selling 3M gloves, whatever it is. Um, systems that meet those criteria, I think. And like, look, there's system thinkers much better articulation than I am, but that's how I think about it.
yeah.
Sort of mental.
Well, when does a system become tyrannical?
Um, when it's not evaluated and it's not criticized on its own. I think when people, you know, can you divorce your identity from your idea or your system, and can you maintain a critical, constantly evaluative perspective on that system, because then it won't become tyrannical if you're constantly improving it. I think the other trap here is and I've fallen into this trap in business because I'm a little bit goal indexed towards goal and achievement.
Hmm.
Um, is I get like, oh, I want to cross it off my list. Like I get
Yeah. Get it
about it. Have
done.
you had that?
Yeah.
And you get to the point where you're like, it's not done. Like definition of done. You get into the whole GTD thing, and you're like, there's systems aren't, they're not a checklist, right? They have to be. I think of them as a living, breathing thing that needs constant care, feeding, and nurturing, and evaluation, and with that feedback loop, or else it does just it becomes a habit. And as we all know in life, there's good habits and bad habits, right?
Yeah.
And so, is your system a bad habit, or is it something that's truly contributing to the betterment of whatever it's intended to do?
Yeah.
Can you divorce your ego or your identity from that system such that you can evaluate it critically?
Yeah. And so I guess when I think about systems too, the level of complexity that is rising across the board, whether it's local level or societal level, the systems are just getting so complex that as humans, it's almost like we're we're really struggling to navigate that. So what would you say? What would your advice be to on how to navigate the complexity, the seemingly and reality of the ever increasing complexity of the systems that we find ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I've really liked the recent, last few years discussion in sort of this resurgent um, conversation and field of study just around first principles and first principle thinking. And what are you really trying to solve with that system? Or again, are you doing it out of habit, or um, like why is it there? Like
Yeah.
what's the question? And I think not to conflate the two, but systems and bureaucracies and systems and independent of the organization from which they're associated, it's an important distinction. Um, but we all watch this sort of in government or even universities when we were dealing with the establishment, when we were
Yeah.
this sort of the students tend to be the change agent,
Yeah.
and the faculty, staff, and the administration. Some of the faculty are friends to the change agents, some aren't.
Yeah.
uh, Faculty senate was a wild time as a 21-year-old, just
Yeah.
that. Thankfully Jill took care of a lot of that for us. But I think bureaucracies never shrink.
Yeah.
Right? And like it's unnatural, right? And I every time I get on this way of thinking, Jason, I think of that when in the Matrix, their first Matrix, when Agent Smith's talking to Morpheus about how humans are a virus.
Yeah.
We only know how to grow. Um, I reflect on that, right?
Yeah.
And I reflect on that um, in many contexts, not only in a
Mhm.
business context.
Yeah. So what final words of wisdom do you have for us? Anything you wanted to share that you didn't get a chance to, or
No, I'm happy to share. I'm as you could probably tell, pretty open, transparent person. I like, um, you know, hopefully people get some nuggets out of this conversation. And again, I thank you for the opportunity. I don't think I'm worthy of the title of the podcast, but I'm grateful. But I guess I would just say I'd hope that more people alive today just can begin to think long term about how they live. Right, just think beyond yourself, value the collective good, uh, and just find a way to realize that old, I don't, there's no good attribution. I actually looked up just trying to figure out where I got this from, I don't know. But that old proverb of that the earth is not given to you by your parents, but you're actually borrowing it from your children.
Mm.
Uh, and what does that really mean, borrowing the
Hmm.
earth? Um,
Stewardship and
and I don't know. I would just maybe have people reflect on that a little bit more and how they can implement that in their lives.
yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. How can people connect with you, the business? How can they find them online?
Yeah, I'm always findable, JP at pipelinecrm.com, or Twitter, JP Werlin, Werlin, all one. Um, and just I answer every email. So we'll get back to you, and happy to talk about what's going on with you.
Yeah. And then the website for the pipeline is pipelinecrm.com, right?
100%.
Awesome.
Remember the number finally, 866-27303. But uh,
Call, give us a call.
numbers on your homepage. I still find businesses hiding from their customers. I'm like, put it on your homepage.
Well, and another thing is, I think even if a customer,
Yeah,
yeah.
100%.
So
100%. Cool.
cool. Well, thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you, Jason.